our first episode of Tell It As It Is, where we share our stories and give God glory.
Awesome. Welcome, everyone. So we're so glad to have Abigail Boudreaux in our midst. How do you pronounce your last name?
That's exactly right.
Yeah,
Boudreaux.
Boudreaux?
Yeah.
Okay.
Awesome.
So, who is Abigail? Tell us.
Who is Abigail?
Yeah,
Ugh.
who's
Well,
Abigail?
first, most everybody calls me Abby, so if you want to go that route, that's cool. Abigail, that's cool too. I'm originally from Louisiana, so I'm a Cajun, bona fide Cajun. And then I moved to Texas when I was 14, so I've been here since 14. I just graduated with my bachelor's degree, which is exciting.
Congrats.
Yes, and I actually just got accepted to a master's program in education, so I'll be working on that in the fall. Yes.
Nice.
Yes. Let's see, for fun, I'm really a homebody. I like being home. I like reading. Kind of an old lady. Like I like to do the cross stitching and like coloring and crochet. So
Okay,
yeah.
so you got that artistic side going on.
Yeah, super artsy. I like decorating my house. I'm always changing something all the time.
No, I
'Cause
noticed
it's
right off the
fun.
bottom, like, look at that background. Like, whoo.
Yeah.
Yeah, trust me, it's nice.
Yes.
It's nice. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So you wrote a book. I love the book. It's amazing. Life After Death, Healing from Traumatic Loss. I think it's great. I just loved it because there's a lot of truth in it. I feel like a lot of people could connect because you allowed yourself to be vulnerable and share experiences with the readers. And I also love that you brought in scripture, and you could relate through the scriptures depending on what you go through. But I just loved it. That's why I have all these sticky notes here. So thank you so much for that, allowing yourself to be used that way. That's amazing. Okay, so for sure, just start off like, why did you write the book? Is it like were you feeling like it's something that the Lord was leading you to do, or something you felt like other people needed to know about your recovery process? Um, yeah.
Yeah. So this we're gonna backtrack a little bit.
Hmm.
So when I was a teenager, really I've always written, but I just didn't really make the connection that that was a gift that I had until I was a teenager. And then when that connected, I wrote another book actually in 2020. That one's called Seasons. It's like a devotional, and that one is pretty much a giant compilation of stuff that I have just been writing since a teenager. I just pulled some and like categorized them. I've always been big on like journaling, so I'm sure that had come to play in it too. But probably when the Lord started dealing with me about writing for the public, like publishing, it was closer to my 20s, which I'm 25 right now, so it wasn't that long ago. But I've always felt that I was given this gift to talk about stuff that is not usually talked about, like um, for instance, this book, people would stray away from talking about like it's a big event and it can be very um what's the right word? I don't want to say it's rare, but in our faith, I don't know a whole lot of people who's had a family member who has been murdered, you know. Um, but I've actually come in contact with a lot of people. I would say probably 90% of the people that have reached out to me about the book have had family members that have committed suicide, which is not talked about. Like I mean, I don't hear about it. So yeah, I just feel like the Lord gave me this gift specifically to, um, yeah, just be vulnerable about stuff that people aren't usually willing to be open about, which, you know, I understand because it's a big deal. So
Mm-hmm. Well,
yeah.
thank you for that. Thank you for using your gift and blessing us with it. Um, so do you mind sharing a bit more about the story behind your book?
Yes. So it's all the first chapter is actually called November 16th, 2020. Um, that day it happened around 7 p.m. I got a phone call from my mom that my aunt had been shot. And I was like, I'm sorry, what? Like, I heard what she said, but it didn't compute. Like, it wasn't because she was also not panicking. I'm sure it was because she was in shock. But it was just threw me off because I was like, okay, this is like, she's not alarmed sounding.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, okay. I was like, okay. And then she was like, all right, I gotta go. I gotta call your brother. At the time, he was in training for the National Guard. He had just joined training, so she was trying to inform all the people. And then when she hung up, I was just like, okay, God. But like in the pit of my stomach, even though I was in shock, like I knew she was gone,
Wow.
which that's hard to admit. I probably wouldn't have admitted that even a couple of months ago, but in the pit of my stomach, I kind of already knew like, yeah, she's gone. And we didn't have any information because it was pretty real time. It happened pretty
Mm-hmm.
quick. Um, I have four cousins, so one of them was on the phone real time. My mom, this is my mom's younger sister. So her older sister lives in Louisiana with pretty close to them. So it was just like a phone call train. Like that's how fast it happened. So we had no information. So I got off the phone, threw some clothes on because it was at night. So I just threw some kind of something presentable on because I was like, people are going to be showing up. I'm assuming I got to be looking some kind of right.
Yeah.
And then I just went into like, I don't know what to call it, like analytical mode. Like my brain just went into a to-do list. Like,
Mm-hmm.
okay, I got to go downstairs. I got to um, go figure out, you know, well, what's happening. So I go downstairs. My other brother, he's younger, I'm the oldest, and then my one in the National Guard, and then I have one more younger. So he's in the living room, just white as a sheet, and I was like, oh, okay, this is really not good. Go to my mom's room. She's on the phone. My dad's on the phone trying to get information because we didn't know anything. All we know is she was shot. Um, and I would say it probably wasn't. I honestly can't remember how much time, but it wasn't that long. Maybe 30 minutes. Around. It could have been less than that. I'm not really sure. But my uncle in Louisiana called my mom. He was a police officer at that time. So
Mm-hmm.
he wasn't on duty, but he knew the police that showed up there. And so, you know, he was in the know. So he was the one that informed my mom that she was gone. And before he even said anything, all he said was her name. My mom's name is Crystal. He just said Crystal, and like that was it. You know, havoc and scene. So
Wow.
I was actually on the phone with my brother at that point because he was calling me because he didn't want to, you know, call my mom or my dad or whatever. So I'm the one who told my brother, which seems like it would be a hard thing to do, but it just happened so fast. It was just like, wow, I can't believe I did all that in the moment, you know?
Mm-hmm.
So everything kind of sped up from there. I was on the phone with my cousins. They were trying to be like transported. They just immediately went to my aunt's house, which is about 45 minutes from where they lived. So they were taken care of. But so yeah, we just literally, my mom was, you know, having her moment. My dad was having his moment, trying to take care of her moment. And I was
Yeah.
just like, okay, go get the luggage, go do this, go do that. And what's also crazy is that this was the week before Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving was the next week. And that Monday during the day, I had already started packing a suitcase because I was going to see my best friend who lived in Georgia at the time that weekend after my brother got married.
Mm-hmm.
So my bag was literally packed. when I ran back upstairs and I saw my suitcase in the middle of my floor, I was like, what is happening? Like my brain was just, but it still wasn't, I never got emotional in that moment. Again, I think my natural reaction I've learned in tough situations is just to go into like, I have to take care of everything, which is probably my first child syndrome kicking in too. But my pastor's wife showed up, and coincidentally, they were actually having a prayer meeting at church while all of this was happening. I don't know how I missed the fact that they were actually having a prayer meeting, but they announced it immediately. Everybody was praying for my family. My pastor showed up right after that meeting was over. We had a couple of other church people show up. I don't even know who called them or how they even knew where I lived, which is crazy, but they were just there. And I was like, okay. So, yeah, they helped us get on the road. And I would say probably like within the hour, we were on the road headed there.
And through this whole procedure, like this whole situation, it didn't really kick in. It didn't really sink in yet.
Yeah.
Wow. So when did you realize, oh my gosh, like this is real, like this happened, you know? When did that really sink in for you?
I think it was probably, I can't remember what day it was, but this happened on a Monday. Her funeral was on a Friday, the same Friday. We had it done pretty quick. My aunt was in charge of like planning the funeral and stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And of course, everybody's kind of like stretched between making sure the kids are okay, making sure each other is okay. My mom and her sisters were very tight. Sisterhood of all sisterhood, like they're the like perfect example of what sisterhood would look like. So just I don't know if either one of you have ever been through like losing a loved one, but it's although personally, but they knew her. So it was hard. So just everybody just had no words. Just when they saw me, they just would hug me and cry. Again, I'm not a crier, especially when I see other people crying. It's more just like, okay, I'm the strong one, like we're not doing this, you know, which I worked on through therapy, which I'm sure we're gonna get there. um, so the first Sunday was just kind of a blur, everybody just, you know, but as time went on, I would think about other people in our church that have went through traumatic losses, not in the same way, but like just traumatic losses of a spouse or a child, or even just family situations that I knew of. And I would remember like, oh, like when they came back to church, it was like a major ordeal and everybody was emotional because they were they're like the epitome of like a testimony of faith kind of deal.
Okay.
And so I think I was just automatically primed, like, okay, like that's what we're gonna do, because that's what we do.
Mm-hmm.
And then when it came time to do it, it was like, oh, okay, this isn't fun. This is not fun, because I had later I was diagnosed with a panic disorder after all of this. And it really got triggered at church, which I found out pretty quickly. So just before I knew what the triggers were, the whole thing was just overwhelming. And I remember, I can't remember if it was the first Sunday I was back in church or maybe it was the next Sunday again, because we were going back and forth. So it's still all kind of a blur, but it was a specific Sunday night. I came to church. I didn't even want to be there, but I was like, okay, I'm going to sing in the choir. We're going to do the things,
Still
we're
showed
going to
up.
be the
Wow.
example. And I couldn't even make it through choir practice. I was just so like, I wasn't crying because the crying came a little bit later. For me, it was more, I was probably still in shock, to be honest. I'm sure that was just dissociation, even maybe. But I couldn't do it. Like my stomach was hurting so bad. My head was hurting. I was overwhelmed. And I told my pastor's wife, I was like, I gotta go to your office. Like, I can't do this. I need to go to your office. So I just stayed in her office. I think I probably stayed there for the rest of the service because I just physically I could not do it. And in my head, I was like, what is happening? Like, I don't understand what's happening. And then the next service, I was like, okay, we're gonna try a new approach. we're not gonna sing in choir because obviously that's too much. But we're just gonna, we're just gonna sit and we're gonna worship and we're gonna do all the things. Well, sat in the pew, and it was just like, I don't know. I guess maybe it was still a symptom of panic. Maybe, I'm not sure. I don't know if that was my thumbs up. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah, I saw that.
The I think I was the only one there. I don't think my parents were there that night. But I was just sitting there, and my body was so heavy. Again, I just could not physically stand up. Like, I just sat there the whole service because I couldn't. I couldn't move. Like, I felt like I couldn't breathe. Everybody else, church is just happening. Just like I'm not even there. People are crying. Everybody praying for each other. Choirs rumbling and rolling. All the things, and I'm just there. And I'm having like dialogue with myself in my head the whole time. And I'm like, okay, what is the point of this? Like how, like, it was almost like I questioned everything about everything.
Wow.
Again, thinking about the people who successfully came back to church and worshiped like nothing happened, but obviously something very big did happen. And then I started to feel like everything was a fake, like this is a show. Because I, like, it's not possible. I can't do this. I'm just, I'm here. But after I'm rationalizing all of this in my head, at the end point, I was like, okay, you know what? I can't stand up right now, but I can sit here. So if I have to sit here all service, I'm going to sit here. And there was quite a few services when I started off okay. I got in there, and then it was just that, whatever that physical feeling was that was happening, and all I could do was sit there. It was like my hands were, I just couldn't, my body would go numb a lot. That was one of my symptoms for when I was having a panic attack. My arms especially would go numb, and it was kind of crazy. But again, the pain too, like my stomach would be in pain, my head would be in pain. It was crazy. That's how a lot of my panic attacks were. I did have a lot worse in church in front of people, which is a whole other thing. But that's how it started. But in my mind, I was like, I'm just, if all I can do is sit here, that's what I'm gonna do, because I know this feels so bad that if I stop coming to church, I'm not gonna come back. Wow. So I knew in my mind, even though it was horrible, I was like, if all I can do is sit here, I'm gonna sit here. And eventually that turned into, okay, now I can stand here. And then, okay, now we can pray. Okay, now we can cry in church and not be triggered. Because that was another thing. When I was able to start feeling, the feels, and then it turned into just, I was crying all the time. Every day I would get home from work. As soon as I got home from work, I would just cry, and I couldn't stop crying for hours. And I was like, okay, seriously, how much water like is behind my eyeballs? This is crazy. So yeah, and then so when it would get triggered in church, like I'm feeling the Lord, so I'm an emotional person, so I would start crying, but it would immediately switch from I'm feeling the Lord to like a grief explosion of, like, it wasn't a prayer anymore, it was a gut-wrenching like reaction to what was happening. And I struggled with that for a long time too, like, well, why am I going to keep going to church and I can't like get a breakthrough? Because what might have looked like I was having a breakthrough, it wasn't a breakthrough. It was a grieving session. I had a lot of those, So yeah, it was a lot of hurdles.
Wow. I like the fact that you still showed up, just the way in the best way you could. If it was just sitting, you sat, and you allowed I could hear the transition from the numbness to allowing yourself to cry and just crying. But you could see that transition. I think it's amazing that, it all happened in the presence of God,
Yeah. For sure.
Yeah, that's actually very powerful, because sometimes people go through their situations and their seasons, whether it's grief or whatever the situation is in their life, and they just come to church and we expect them to, have the whole thing together. Clap your hands, stand up, come on, do this, come on, give God praise. When, in essence, it's just like it's a victory just to be there. We just need to leave people and let God do what he's doing in their life. And it's just a victory for them to be in the house of God.
I think so.
Yeah.
I think so. Yeah, because we can see, we want in the best interest, want people to
Yeah.
recover and to know that God heals and everything, but it doesn't happen the way we think it's going to happen or how, right?
Yeah.
So how did this affect your relationship with God? Did you go through a period where you're like, God, why did you let this happen, God? I believe your aunt was a Christian.
Yes.
Yeah. Did you go through like questioning God, like, God, did she serve you? Why did you, God, like, was that something that really bothered your mind or, came to your mind any at all? Or what were some of the thoughts that you had with the Lord?
Yeah, so it more so started off with my family. So it's not, I didn't mention it, but it was a murder suicide. So the um it was very hard for me to rationalize. I grew up very sheltered. So I grew up in church. My mom did her very best job to, shelter us from all the stuff. And even after the fact, after it happened, I was like, okay. I started like putting dots together of stuff that I remembered, but it wasn't explicitly talked about, which again, I was a kid when all of these things were happening. And you just don't tell children XYZ, At least that would be the rational thing to do. um, and I was more like, I started asking questions. I was like, this might be triggering to people, but like, I don't care because I need to know, like, why didn't anybody do anything? Like, obviously, everybody saw this coming. So why didn't anybody do anything,
Okay.
But, and that whole questioning, I had to learn about domestic abuse and how that works, victim mentality. It's a thing. It's a whole That's a whole nother can of worms. So once I understood that, I was like, okay, it's not that people weren't giving their opinions and giving, you know, trying to think of another way to say it, advice, you know.
Yeah.
It was yeah, I can't remember what the percentage was in researching, but most of the time, the only way you get out of an abusive relationship is if someone dies, which is very brutal and that's very unfortunate, but it is also very true. And her story is so different, I would say, in that because she was a Christian and it was more based around narcissistic things than physical abuse.
Okay.
So it's not as easy to identify, from the outside looking in. So yeah, I was asking all the questions because I didn't understand. So once I did understand, then I was like, okay, she's human. What would I do? I always try to do that, put myself in that situation. What would that look like for me? Knowing myself, how would I react to that? Okay, I would probably be stuck in that pattern too, because again, I'm human.
Right.
We're all human. But one thing is that she always, kept the faith, which is, her name is Faith, which is kind of it's funny, but like, um, yeah, all the time. Yeah, she got on my case a couple of times about, just in general. She was a youth leader there for a while, so she was all in my business. So yeah, then it started turning to God, like, okay, why? Because it was so devastating, not just in losing her. That's what makes this story a little different too, is the trauma aspect of it, because you're dealing with normal grieving, normal emotions of loss, that's really not abnormal. Everybody experiences it at some point in their life.
That's
But
right.
but adding in the traumatic aspect of it is a whole nother thing, You might have PTSD,
Yeah,
you might
yeah.
have a panic disorder, you might have, it's a lot. And then you also have, in our case, I was still living at home at the time. I had to adjust to living with 4 more people in my house. Like, yes, we loved them, we wanted to be there for them, but that was an adjustment. That was hard. I had to adjust to my parents becoming somebody else's parent for somebody else's parents,
Right.
actually, that had a lot of needs and a lot, I justified it by I'm grown, at this point. I can do this. I can take care of myself. Their role is to take care of them right now. So I try to just keep that in perspective. But it was still hard because I got to a point where I was like, these are my parents. I feel like I got robbed of so many um I don't want to say milestone moments with them, but basically, and my brother would probably feel the same way because again, he got married without any of us there. Their wedding was planned for that weekend, but I think it was planned for that Saturday. But on Thursday, I believe it was Thursday, they drove back to Louisiana, which was about a 4-hour drive. My pastor married them in his office, and they
Oh,
came back for a funeral. So it just stole, to me, it stole my parents from me. Like, I got to a point where that was hard. So I was like, okay, God, you literally took everything away from me. You took away my aunt. You took away my safety and where I live in my day to day. I come here and go to sleep in this comfortable bed, and I don't feel safe here anymore. It was a lot, and it was a very that was very hard for me in the beginning. Um, Not to mention we're living in close quarters. A couple of them had to sleep in the game room because we don't live in a mansion, you know. So we're all living on top of each other. Everybody has their own stuff, all together, all the time. It's a lot.
right, right.
So yeah, that's what I struggled with God with the most, I think, because I knew she was in heaven. So I'm like, and I had already rationalized any outcome that could have happened, as horrible as it is, this is the best one for her because she's with Jesus. She not
Mhm.
worried about nobody down here, you know. Um, so it was hard, but I was okay with that. But it was all this other stuff. Like, what about us down here? That's still living here. That's dealing with all this stuff. I can't function in my house. I don't feel safe. I can't function at school. Um, at work. I say school, but work
Right.
where I'm working. It's hard. I can't function when I go to church. I'm having panic attacks when I go to church. I can't sleep because I'm having nightmares, you know. And what was also hard was I couldn't write anymore. I tried to write. That was like my go-to. I would journal. I would um, oftentimes I will write like to somebody, but what I would want somebody to tell me. That's how I think
Right.
that's how I grew up processing stuff. It was like kind of through writing, and I couldn't do it. Like, I tried typing on my phone, I tried writing on a piece of paper, and it was just nothing.
Writer's
Nothing.
block. Block, block, block.
It was, yeah, like writer's block, but it was like so much bigger than writer's block. It was just like, and it was disheartening. So I'm like, okay, and now the outlet that I am used to having, besides prayer, because sometimes I would write prayers too, it is gone. Like, I have nothing, and this is so writing was so wrapped up into my future. Like, I was like, okay, I'm gonna write this many books, and I'm gonna do, just the vision that I had was all wrapped up around the fact that I write. I'm a writer, and now I can't do it. So I'm like, I'm getting a whole bachelor's degree in English and writing. What is that gonna do for me now? So it
So
was it stole like purpose, I guess, in that way. So when I looked into the future, I saw nothing. It was nothing.
Was that the moment when you were like, when you considered therapy?